I am delighted to invite to the stage an old friend of mine, the wonderful Elna Coetzer, who is a learner, a teacher educator, a CELTA Delta tutor based in Istanbul, Turkey, where I knew her from. And she's interested in all things education, likes to learn about new ways to be an effective educator, and enjoys talking about everything related to teaching and learning. She's a ferocious reader, both around education and fiction, although a dark detective novel is her favourite. And how we can make well-being key in education, how we can develop more learner output in the classroom, and how we can support deeper thinking in our learners are some of the aspects close to her heart. She's joining us today with a session entitled Manage My Feelings, Emotional Regulation in the Classroom. Elna, hi, how are you doing? I will let you get on with it.
I'm all good and I'm excited. It's so lovely to see everybody here. I've noticed that there are some people that I know also in the... Oh, that is so very cool. And so many people from Turkey. Nice to see you all, from Istanbul, and of course from the rest of the world. It's so lovely to see you all today. So I think we need to get straight on with this. And we're going to talk a little bit today about feelings. Some of my favorite things, I think, feelings, and talking about them obviously are really, really important for us. And so we're going to crack on, and we're going to start immediately. Now, I think what's important for us to remember is when Seligman started talking about positive psychology, and when he pulled out the idea that positive psychology is based around positive subjective experiences, positive individual characteristics, and also positive institutional characteristics, I think this is where we started talking about feelings. This is when we started talking about emotions, etc. And so we've talked about emotions for a while now, but I think it was only when we kind of came face to face with our experiences during COVID where we really started thinking about, oh, how am I feeling about these things? What are my feelings? And how can I manage them? And how can I be better at them? Now, interestingly enough, Reeves, when he talks about emotions, he talks about short bouts of arousal, or he talks about feelings, and he talks about expressive phenomena. And he kind of talks about these things in terms of really short experiences. And he talks about them around bigger events in our lives. But I think I would argue that actually emotions are around us. Feelings are around us every day. Feelings happen to us all the time. And I think what we need to try and do is we need to bring them into the classroom. We need to talk about them a lot more. And that's what we're going to try and do today. So we're going to start out with the first. And I would like you to give yourself a score on your own emotional regulation. So how well do you feel you are doing with your emotional regulation? So between 1 and 5. So 1, absolutely terrible, and 5, you are a super duper emotional regulation animal. So let's see what kind of score. Okay, good. It's good to see a few 3s, because I think it is always something that we're working on. It's never a finished product. And so a 3, I think, is a good place to be, because sometimes you are towards a 2, and sometimes you move towards a 4 or even a 5. And so I think it's good to see that. I think also it's important to note that it's not something that is a stable process. It's something that happens. And sometimes you wake up and it kind of is not such a good day, etc. Okay, so we're going to think a little bit about emotional intelligence. And what I would like you to do is, on screen, you'll see four statements. And these are all about emotional regulation. And what I would like you to do is I would like you to state if you think that they are true or false. So you're just going to go true, true, false, false, true, or true, false, etc. Yeah. So you can just do TFFT or FFTF, whichever way you feel. So comment on all four of those statements. And what we'll do is we'll come back to these at the end of the session and have a look and see. Good. Okay. Great. So we've got some really good ideas. So as I said, we'll come back to this at the end of the session, and maybe we'll need to make a few adjustments. But before we continue, we need to think a little bit about terminology. But I think what is important is that, interesting, Charlotte. Okay. So what is really important is that we need to define our term. And I'm wondering, what do you think? What would be the term? What is the term for emotional regulation, if you had to define it? Oh, I see that my slides are going completely crazy, guys. I'm not sure how that happened. Let's try that again. Okay.
Oh, what's happening, Elna? Are they jumping, or are you?
They are. Yes, they're jumping around madly. So I think I'm on track now. Thank you again, Sean.
Okay, we're listening if needs.
Thank you very much. Okay, so defining our terms. What is emotional regulation? Nice. You've got some great ideas. Oh, I see someone is connecting it with emotional intelligence. I see there's a lot about self-control. Yeah. Interesting. Someone says hold. It is often about holding. I think that is true. I think also that idea that you're bringing up about self-management, etc. I think that kind of connects really nicely. So I think when we look at this, it is a really, really big field. It's something that we have to really consider in depth. But it is really how we look at our experiences and how we process them and how we then express our emotions. And so basically all of these things come together in order to become our emotional regulation. Now, if I can give you an example, let's give you an example from the classroom. If I have a child who wants to play, but unfortunately he now has to do a lesson, and he is throwing a tantrum because he wants to play instead of doing a lesson, then that shows that there is a problem with his emotional regulation, or it has not developed yet. Because what we need to, of course, do is first do our work, and then we can play. But if I haven't actually developed that or have reached that stage yet, then I am going to just throw a tantrum. And I think that this is something that we all have experienced in our classrooms. Actually, we also experience it in the supermarket or in a taxi. So I think that this is something that is actually universal. But also, I think what is important is that it's not just how we experience emotion, but also which emotion we're feeling. Also, when we are feeling these emotions, and also then how we express or experience them. So I think it takes us quite a bit further from where we're actually just talking about the emotion, as Reeves would say, but it actually brings us to a point where we actually look at, oh, so what, this is a nice word, Khulud, the idea of what is triggering this specific thing that I'm experiencing. Also, the idea of what exactly am I feeling? So not just, oh, I'm feeling bad, or, oh, I'm feeling upset, but what exactly is it that I'm feeling? Nice idea, Fatu, with the app about how we feel today. That's great. So essentially, these are the things that we need to look at. And I think you're bringing in all the really great ideas that you've kind of mentioned. And so essentially, if we've looked at emotional regulation, then I can also think about emotional style. Now, I wonder if you've ever heard of emotional style before. That's a nice point, Nasir. Yes. So very much it is about how I feel about things, etc. So this is a very interesting concept. And this is a concept that Donaldson talks about in his book, The Emotional Life of Your Brain. And what they did is they've actually done some studies about our brains and how our brains connect with our emotions, and what happens when we're feeling sad, or what happens when we're feeling happy, or what happens when we're excited, etc. And they've also studied brains of people who are good at emotional regulation and not so good. And they've looked at these aspects, and they've pinpointed these 6 things that kind of show us how we work, or how we express our emotional style. Resilience, I think we all know. It's how I deal with an issue and how I kind of get over it. Outlook is about how positive I am and how long I can sustain that feeling of positivity. Social intuition is about how I can read signals. So, for example, if I'm in a social environment, can I read how the room is feeling or not? And that is something that is also very important. And the idea of course, self-awareness. Yeah. What am I doing? What is my impact on this? Then the idea of sensitivity to context. Yeah. So am I in a business environment, or am I out with my friends? Am I just sitting in a cafe, etc.? And also the idea of attention. Yeah. And all of these things come together to give us the idea of emotional style. Now, if you are a little bit more interested about this, go and read Donaldson and Begley's book about the emotional life of your brain, because it's really, really interesting. But for us, actually, I want to talk about how emotional style connects. And it connects in this way. So essentially, my emotional style directly influences my emotional regulation. Yeah. So think a little bit about an example in your own life. I'm going to go back to the previous slide. Think about these aspects of a situation that you've experienced, and then see how that influenced your emotional regulation. That's great, Paula. That's really great. I think it's a really interesting book. So that's interesting. That's a really interesting comment, Fatou. I like the idea of kind of talking about a modern concept of controlling emotions. Um, I think this is interesting because you're all kind of giving me ideas about how my emotions were influenced by other people or by what happened in the environment, etc. But I think, and this is where emotional regulation is so fundamentally important, is that essentially we have decisions to make. And essentially, we can act upon things or not, as the case may be. And these people like Gross talks about his process model of emotional regulation, and it's very interesting how he says there's actually a process of how we work through emotions. And so we kind of we notice the emotion, then we decide how we feel about it, and then we decide what we're going to do about it. And once we've got all of those things, we kind of monitor how things are going. And then we adjust as the case may be. And I think let's think about it in a normal situation. Say you are having problems with a colleague. Um, and so there is, let's say there are words. You're having some words with your colleague. Then you kind of go, okay, so this is what happened. That's the situation. But what am I feeling about that? I also go and say, okay, so what should I feel, or how could I change things, or how can I react to things? And then basically I react, I change, etc. And once I've done that, I then go and say, okay, let's see, how does this work? So when I interact with that colleague, am I using the right strategy? Am I using the best tool to deal with that emotion? And that, in a nutshell, is emotional regulation. Okay. Now, I think we can all think about examples of this in our own lives. Yeah. And I see, Calvin, you're kind of emptying my talk a little bit. It's very interesting because in some ways, we kind of work through things every day as it comes. But now my question is it important? What do you think? Do you think it is important? What do you think is the short answer? Okay, so I've got a few yeses. Can you add why? Now I'm making it a little bit trickier. Why do we think that this is important? Great. Okay, good. You've got some great ideas. Yeah, so the short answer really is yes. And so essentially, I can shout out yes. It's really, really fundamentally important. And this is important for ourselves in our private lives. This is important for ourselves outside in the world. It also is important for us in our professional life. And it is also important for us when we deal with our students. Now, interestingly enough, people like Nu talk about emotional intelligence or emotional regulation is not just about what I do, but also how I do it with other people. So with other people and for other people. And I think that is, again, another level of regulation that we need to consider. I'm going to spell it for you. Gkonou. So when you start reading a little bit around well-being and emotional regulation, you'll find his name quite often. Okay, now how do we learn? What are the ways that we learn how to regulate our emotions? Let's see, what ideas have you got? Very nice idea, Ali. I agree 100%. Yes. Great. Yes, absolutely. Oh, older and wiser. Yes, I do think we do become older and wiser. I agree with you there too. Yes. Okay, so it's quite interesting because if you look at it, you'll see that initially, when we have a little person, little people model. If you remember, those of you who have children, um, if mommy cried, um, the little guy was upset, and the little guy kind of maybe had an upset tummy, um, or the little guy got ill, etc. And so there's kind of modeling that goes on. And there's also modeling in terms of what the little child sees, um, the little child then shows when he kind of does things. So, for example, if you grow up in a family that is calm, relaxed, and there's no real stress, then often the child, when kind of issues come up, might also experience or model the same kind of calm, relaxed feeling. Then the next step is by observing. Oh, that's a nice one, Charlotte. Thank you. Yeah, so I think it is that kind of, we model what we see from our peers or the older people in our lives. Yeah? Then we move on to the process of observation. Because of course we go out into the world, we maybe go to kindergarten or we go to school, etc., and we start seeing other people doing things, and we start imitating other people, and we try and do the same kind of thing. So let's say, for example, we see our friend shouting at his mother over the breakfast table, and we think, oh, I'm going to try that because maybe my friend got a positive reaction from that. And so he's going to go, oh, I'm going to try that. And then you go home and you try out the same thing. And hopefully there's someone in your house who will help you to manage your emotions better, so that you don't have to shout about things, but still can manage and negotiate what you need, etc. Okay, so observation. I think your points of critical thinking, of reflection, of self-awareness, it's constantly growing as we move through until we get to this point where we have experience. And I think, Ali, that is where you kind of mentioned the idea of mistakes. So we've got all kinds of experiences, and as we experience our emotional life, we experience the positive aspects and also the negative things. And so, for example, I don't know, let's say you have your first breakup with your a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and in that kind of you say some maybe really really negative things. Then hopefully you have enough awareness to start thinking about, was that kind of the right way of doing it? Was that the best way that I could manage my emotions? And then we go back to thinking and reflecting and awareness. I like the word empathy because it also connects with that. Okay. And so that kind of is the process that we go through. But there's also one last way that we develop our emotional regulation. And what is that? Any ideas? So what do you think might we have in the question box? Okay. Good. You've got some great ideas, guys. Thank you. I think a lot of what you're saying actually connects a little bit with what we do. Because essentially, I think what is important is that the final way that we learn about emotional regulation is through learning. And I think that is something that is really important. And that is also somewhere we can start addressing things in our classrooms. Because essentially, if I literally teach someone about this process, then I think we can develop a stronger emotional regulation. So just maybe by asking a simple question, etc., could really bring out that idea. Okay, and so we're going to look at some really, really simple ideas, guys. Now, I want to underline that there are loads of beautiful activities that one could do. One could do all kinds of mindfulness activities. One could start discussion protocols. One could do breathing and meditation. All of those kinds of things connect together. But I think we need to start somewhere really, really simple. And often, especially when we have little people in our class, we need to start with the little things. And that's basically where I'm trying to start today. But I do think that some of our ideas can actually be very, very useful for everybody. Yeah. Oh, I like the idea, Neslihan, of keeping a diary. I think the idea of being aware of emotion is very important, because the moment when we are aware of our emotions, then we get into our process. Remember, Gross, he talks about kind of noticing, which is the diary. And then actually he talks about, okay, so how am I going to react to this? And interestingly enough, also is the idea of how we react to things. And basically, we have quite a few options of what we could do. And what we can do is we can remove ourselves from the situation. So this is a situational strategy. So either I can remove myself from a negative situation, or I can find ways that I can put myself into positive situations. And that is in a way that I can regulate my emotion. Another way that I can do things is by kind of trying out a strategy of considering, so a cognitive strategy, thinking deeply about the situation, and then deciding what the options are, and then picking things and just trying out things and seeing what might work and what might not work. And essentially, all of these things together are strategies that we can use. Now, remember, we talked right at the beginning and we said, is this something that I can learn, or is this something that I'm born with? And I think we've maybe kind of thought a little bit more about this. So one of the simplest ideas is this one. So I think often, and I listen to myself sometimes when I talk about how I feel, and I say, I just feel really, really bad about it. But actually, the word bad is not really a useful word, because the word bad is a word that is kind of a very, very general thing. And what we actually want to know is, what exactly do we feel? And so I think that it's really, really useful to actually name my feeling really, really carefully. So say, how are we feeling? Is it frustration? Is it excitement? Exactly what we're feeling. And I think this is also something that we could actually get our students to start learning from a very, very young age. As we go through the years, we could develop their vocabulary about the feelings they have. Now, how are you feeling at the moment? Let's see. Let's see if you can give me a name. Great. Oh, someone is feeling worried. I'm so sure. Oh, how someone is feeling really tired. Oh, so this is quite interesting. I see someone said that he is feeling pushed. And so this is interesting because even though this person is feeling tired, um, there is emotional regulation going on, and he is in the session, and he is even contributing to the session, which is really, really good way to show. Oh, I like the idea of being focused. Great, guys. Um, Beautiful ideas that you're. Oh, Marion is feeling torn. Oh, that is a problem. Oh, you've got some really great words, guys. I like it. So building in those things and helping the students to express themselves is a really useful thing. I think also what you want to think about is that you kind of want to bring things a little bit further. And the next activity is pulling that a little bit further. And the next thing is, so where is the feeling in my body? Now, why am I connecting a feeling to my body? What is the reason? Oh, Charlotte, that's nice. So, what is the reason why we're connecting things to our bodies? So, I'm sure you know that in older times, we thought a lot about where emotions were, and a lot of it is kind of we're expressing things. For example, if we say we're feeling love, then we say that we're actually experiencing love in our hearts. Yeah, but essentially, these things actually do not occur in our hearts, but physiologically everywhere in our bodies. And so I think that this is important to consider because sometimes, for example, if I'm feeling nervous, where is the feeling of nerves? Where do I feel nervous? What is the feeling for nervous? Indeed. Very much so, yeah. So when I kind of am very, very nervous, then we say I have black butterflies in my tummy, and that is the feeling that I have. And so I think it is really important to connect with that. Or for example, if I'm feeling really anxious, what physiological ideas can you? Nice. Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we kind of also can help students to notice the physiological aspects of feelings, then we can really help them to deal with them a little bit better. Yeah, um, and that is something that. So I think also, and this is maybe hopefully something that you notice is what's important for us is to start the conversation, talk about it, bring it into the classroom, and think about it carefully. Now we're going to bring that kind of a little bit further. Okay, and I'm going to stop right here for a moment. And I would like you to think a little bit about an experience that you've had where you had some emotion. Yeah, I don't want to say if it was a bad or a good one, but I want you to just take a moment and on a piece of paper, say what the feeling word was. Say where it was in your body. Say why it was. And then kind of say, was this a useful experience? Was it a useful emotion or not? And how could you change it? Yeah, so just think for a moment. Take a moment, think a little bit. Write it on a piece of paper. Please don't write it here in the chat box. That's a very interesting idea, Juliana. I think a lot of people, when you're frustrated, you kind of feel tired. So the other day I was in a classroom and the teacher actually had this as a little anchor poster on her classroom wall. And this became its part of her lesson. So she taught the students these steps. So she kind of started out with just talking about feeling words. Then she pulled in the idea of, okay, so where is this in my body? Then she kind of started talking about, so why are we having these feelings? And then she did step 5 and step 4 and step 5. But this was over a long period of time. And then what she did is she created an anchor poster and she put it on the wall. And when she realizes that there is a student who's having some kind of emotional regulation issues, then she goes and she kind of brings the child to the poster and they talk through that. And essentially that became part of the classroom routine. And this is something that I think is really important. That's a nice word, Anna. The word grounding. That's so lovely. Okay, so those are really simple ideas, guys. And as I said, there are some really lovely ideas that one could have. Another thing is, and this is something that I do in my own life, when something happens and I experience an emotion, I decide, okay, what am I thinking about this? And then I kind of go, okay, what am I feeling about this? And then I go, okay, so how am I going to act? What am I going to do about this? And I think it's this process that also helps me in my own life to regulate emotions. And I think that this is something that that we kind of need to kind of help students develop. That's great, Kate. I think important is to realize that we're not taking on our students' emotions. We're not dealing with them ourselves. But what we are trying to do is we're trying to develop tools and trying to teach them something that they can actually use in order to deal with them themselves. Okay. this is also something that you don't have to get students to share about. Someone mentioned privacy issues. There's none of that is necessary. But what is necessary is to show students, we've got these tools, and oh, this is interesting, and oh, I can do it this way. And this is something I think that we often don't do, is kind of talk about these things. Also show students. So for example, I could model this in the classroom. If I'm in the classroom and students are shouting and I'm trying to do an activity which I think is really cool and the students are shouting so much, then I can actually model this. I can say, I think when my students are shouting and running around so much, that they don't care about what's happening in the classroom. And then I feel upset about it. And then I can kind of think a little bit about it, and I can say what kind of action I can take. And in that way, I have modeled emotional regulation for students, which is again something that we can help students. That's a nice idea, Paloma. Is that idea of de-escalating things, bringing things down. And I think again, it's that kind of model it, show it, talk about it, etc. Okay. The last activity or the last idea I want to share with you is this idea of creating space. Now, if we as adults are experiencing negative emotion, what do we do?
Elna, sorry about the noise. There's a technical issue that's bleeding noise from a different room in. I'm trying to fix it now, okay?
Thank you. So what are the things that we do? Yeah, that's true. So often we step away, number one. I think what we also do is some of you mentioned you have a cup of tea. Then what you also try and do is you try and come up with a solution. I'm sorry, I'm giggling. Someone mentioned that they also eat. Well, this is also, I think, something that we do when we're stressed and having a bad time. But essentially, what we do is we remove ourselves from the situation. But now, if you remember, in our classroom, this is not possible. Because I have 20 students in my class and 2 students are shouting at each other, then I cannot create space. And so a really great idea is to create a little space somewhere in the school, maybe in a hall somewhere, where there are some cushions and curtains, and just a de-escalation space. Yeah, a space where I can go and say, I'm stepping away. And this is a great place for if there is a student who is having a difficult time, to move away and just take a break. That's a great idea. A calm room. So Jennifer says in her class, in her school, there is a calm room. Okay. And this is exactly what we're trying to do. Yeah. And then once the students have been in a calm room a little bit, they've taken a little bit of it, then we start kind of discussion. And then we kind of bring in the ideas of what we've talked about before, is actually talking about, okay, so what is it? Why is it? How is it? How did my strategy work or not work? So often younger children, for example, their strategy to deal with their emotion is to hit the other person. Yeah, so that is often a reaction. But I think it's quite interesting when you then start talking to the student and say, okay, so was that kind of a helpful strategy? Did that help? Or what happened? Because again, I think what we want to make sure of is that the students understand we want to bring things down into a level where everybody is ready to learn, instead of into that moment where there is an explosion. And I think that that is something that's really, really useful. I like the ideas that you've got, guys. You've all kind of mentioned things like music, walks, dancing. I think that those are all really, really useful ideas, and useful tools. But I think that if you are really, really interested in these kinds of things, that could go and read about it. As I said, there are some beautiful ideas. One of my favorite ideas is the idea of the traffic light. And so basically, the traffic light is obviously red, amber, and green. And what we do is we ask the students where they are at the beginning of the lesson. And so someone says, oh, I'm in green. So that student is ready to learn. But another student might say that he's in red. And then what we need to do is we need to find a way to bring the student into the green area again, because in green is where we'll be ready to learn. Yeah. So that the traffic light is called the self-regulation traffic light. And there are also self-regulation zones that you can look at. So there are lots and lots of ideas that we can think about. I see that a lot of you have mentioned the idea of humor and jokes. And I think that this is a very, very useful tool to use. Although I do think that we need to be a little bit careful, because sometimes if I'm cracking jokes, but someone is having a major emotional crisis, then this could be problematic. Yeah, because that kind of then gives the image of, oh, we're not interested, and we don't want to talk about it. Okay. So finally, we're going to go back to these. Do you think we need to change some of our answers? Remember, you said true, false, false, true, or false, true, true, false. Do I need to change some of my ideas? Oh, Hatu, have you changed your ideas? So actually, number one is 100% true. And I can give you an example of this. For example, if we have a student who has to have observation while he's doing his homework, this is a problem, especially if I'm 12 years old and mom needs to sit next to me to do my homework, then that shows poor emotional regulation strategies. Number two, emotional regulation is 100% connected with our brain. And it's very, very important to kind of think about it and consider it. Emotional regulation is also not something that is fixed, and it's not something that we learn and then it's done. It is something that we develop over time. Of course, if we have awareness, if we reflect about things, etc. And the last one, emotional regulation is of fundamental importance in our lives. I think we've already expressed that. 100% true. Okay. So, any questions? Are there any questions that I've missed, Charlotte?
If you want to have a look in the Q&A tab, Elna, you'll find a few questions in there waiting for you. So just
Nice.
Feel free to pick your own.
Thank you. So Neslan says, if students converted to habitation, like if they're always doing it. So I think that this is important. I think it has to be a habit. But I think you're talking about if students act out, and that is a habit. Then I think that we do need to kind of start looking at Where is this coming from? What are we doing? Why are we thinking about that, etc.? It's kind of a very, very important aspect. I see someone is asking about further reading materials. I think if you read about emotional intelligence, also if you read about psychology in English language teaching, if you read authors like Sarah Mercer and Tammy Gregerson, etc., those people are people that would be really helpful for you. Oh, that's interesting, Elena. So Elena is asking about what about positive emotions? And so I think it's quite interesting. It is true. So we do need to work harder with our negative emotions. But some people, when they experience positive emotions, experience them so strongly that they then take over the whole classroom, for example. And this is also a problem. And so I think also another thing is if I'm having a really, really great day, but someone else is having a terrible day, I still need to have that social awareness that I can't go and have like mad party and shout and scream because the other person is having a bad day. So I think those kinds of things are important. And so I think that also needs to be discussed and talked about, etc. So then Lena has got so teenagers I think is interesting because I think of course you can't put them in the, I don't understand why we cannot put them in the calm place. I think what you can do is you need to create a calm space because this is something that we all do. If I'm having a bad day, I'm taking a moment. If I've had an experience, I take a moment. And so I need to make sure that I can build in that moment for the student. And once we've got that, then we can bring the student back in. And if this is a discussion between two students, if this is an issue, then we can actually talk about that. But if it's not, then I think actually talking to that student and bringing that student back in. I think for me, fundamentally important is actually discussion. And discussing things in open class is completely okay. Because you're not talking about specific emotions or specific feelings, but you're talking about it in general. This is a good question, Ara. It's kind of, how do I pull this person away and not make it seem as if this person has done something wrong? I think that if this is a general thing, if this is a thing that I do all the time, if this is also something that I've modeled myself, yeah. So, for example, maybe you've done something and you've tried to do this beautiful lesson plan and it was a complete disaster, and then you kind of say, I'm just going to take a moment, and then you move away and you model that. And I think if you kind of bring that in, then that could be something. I think it's making a habit of talking about emotional regulation, which is important. I think this is true. I think with close adults, and this is again why I said it's something that we experience all the time. Again, I think if you go back to what Gross says about how this process works, you need to kind of look at how am I feeling about this? What are the things that I can do to fix this? What is the strategy that I'm going to try out? And then try a strategy. And I think this is something that I think often we kind of, because, I think we think about emotions as things that kind of just happen. But actually, I'm kind of more on the side of sometimes we decide what we are feeling. And I think if I decide what I'm feeling and then decide the strategy that I'm going to use, then that could be something that I can practice and I can implement, and I can go back and say, okay, so actually this worked. It was better this time around. I'm trying to think of an example that I can share about an adult. Say, for example, you have, let's give you an example about your boss. So, for example, your boss is someone who maybe does not think before he speaks, and often kind of then says some things that might be rather negative, etc. Then this is kind of a issue where you have to kind of go, okay, so what can I do about it? How do I feel about it? And again, we have these processes. I can either remove myself, which is problematic because then I need to find another job, or I can see if I could start changing things a little bit. And then I have a variety of ways that I can start talking about it. I could, for example, say to the teachers, everybody together, oh, I'm going to do a session on emotional regulation, and then invite the boss and start the conversation a little bit like that, and kind of see if that makes a difference. And then kind of try a different strategy and see if that makes a difference. I think it's a process of learning, and I think that this is something that you could maybe try. So Vanessa says, okay, so I've kind of already given a little bit of ideas about psychology and what you kind of can read around. But as I said, if you read around people like Sarah Mercer and Tommy Gregerson, they all write about it, and they all do research about this. And I think that is something that's very, very useful to look at. The use of AI in stronger emotional regulation. That's a really good question. Actually, not something that I've thought about as such. You know, I think AI is a great, great, great tool, and I think we do need to use it. I think it might actually be useful. We could ask ChatGPT to give us solutions. Yeah, so we could actually come up and say, for example, there was an issue in the classroom. We've discussed it. Then I can go to ChatGPT and I can say to ChatGPT, give me some solutions. Then what I could do is I could get students to vote for the best solution, and we could implement it in the classroom. And that kind of would then also show a practical way that I can be using AI, etc. Yeah. So I think that would be a useful way of looking at it.
Wonderful, Elna. Thank you so much for that session, and we can see so much love coming through